So I'm struck by the extraordinary regularity that there is in day-to-day life, and it sort of suggests that there is a tremendous amount of system effects that happen in everybody's world, right? Whether that system is due to maybe it's the family unit, or maybe it's the organization unit, or institutions. But if you look across the board at different scenarios, you often see very much these sort of systematic effects of people belonging to certain groups. And I'm not sort of breaking it down. Many people sort of think of demographics and things like that, but I mean, it could be any number of things that you might look at. Just an example that's sort of relevant to me as an academic researcher. Just look at the effect of number of publications within 10 years of coming from different institutions, students coming from different institutions, and there is pretty significant effects. If you look at the institutions themselves, if you sort of just count up or take an average of the number of publications from students that come from certain different universities, for example, and you'll see there's always a certain number of, top performing institutions. There's always certain sort of middle ones, and they're very consistent. And that tells me that the individual effect is really not all that big. And the other thing to look at is not only just like the institutions and where people come from, but also the institutions and where they go to. Those kind of things interact, but then you might look at other factors beyond that, right? So you might look at family situations and gender and all those kind of things, and you'll see a pretty consistent, almost an unusual regularity between folks. And that might even be within companies too, right? Where you start breaking it down into companies of this certain age and this certain size, of this kind of this type of performance level. These organizations that belong to these kind of industry sectors, they have this performance level. All of those kind of things, or some organizations that perform this particular kind of management style versus another one, that tells you that for a huge part of what we actually do, that there's just system effects that happen. It's not necessarily to do with individual effects. And it strikes me as how much that actually is the case just in regular everyday life. If you're sort of doing your thing, like my life is probably similar to yours, is that there's a tremendous amount of regularity that happens. And that regularity is different for some people than others, but it's still regularity. And I think it's those differences in regularity that actually lead to these sort of system effects, right? Like in how it's actually shaped, the activities that are performed, that lead to these overall system effects that happen. And I don't think I'm becoming increasingly more convinced that it's not necessarily, individuals' ability and things like that. That's not what's going on, but it's more of these sort of system effects that happen. Whether it's due to like culture or, the routines that people perform, the sort of ambitiousness or entrepreneurialness that's within the particular sort of system unit. If you start looking at all of those things, you start to see that there's enormous amounts of regularity between what we do and the activities that we actually perform over time and the performance that we actually get. So I think it's just a really interesting thing to look at and to think about, is how much regularity and consistency we actually have on a day-to-day basis. The idea that we sort of move around or move up or, move down, I don't think that is as strong of effect as we would sort of hope. We have a bit of a, particularly in America, but in most Western countries, we have that kind of dream of moving up over time. And what necessarily doesn't, it's not, if you look at it, might not be the individuals moving through social class or something along those lines or becoming better. It's just that they're in this one sort of cohort that people didn't get access to before. And then they're able to move up in that certain way. They just go into a particular different sort of cohort or different system situation that pushes them together along with everybody else that have the very similar characteristics and traits. So I just think it's remarkable if you start looking at this, and it sort of explains a lot. I would say the explanatory power of various different system effects that we have is probably, in my best guess, and this is just a guess, is probably 75 to 90% of anything that we see, any particular, performance differences that we actually see. I think it's actually enormous compared to, the sort of general story that people are told of if you just simply work hard enough, you'll get to some place, better or whatnot, like all those kind of stories. That's not really what's going on, but it's more of the general cohort system effects that happen that really do matter. So with that, hopefully you enjoyed this conversation. Take care and have a wonderful day.